Welcome to the San Jose Airport Commission meeting of Monday, February 11th, 2019. Ms. Adams, would you call roll?
Chair Connolly,
Present.
Vice Chair Head,
Here.
Commissioner Pyle,
Here.
Commissioner Cruz,
Here.
Commissioner Matsushima,
Here.
Commissioner Schmidt,
Here.
Commissioner Blake, Commissioner Greenlee,
Here.
Commissioner Stember,
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks,
Here.
and you have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Moving to, we have no public records, and moving to the consent calendar, we are going to pull item C up because consent calendar before we approve items A and B, the approval of minutes. Is there any issues that anyone has with the minutes of the November 5th and January 14th? Then I would take a motion to approve those minutes together, items A and B. Moved by Commissioner Matsushima, second by Commissioner Hendricks. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to consent calendar item C. I pulled that from the consent calendar, and I just need to find where we just had that. And I apologize. Here we go. And the reason for pulling that from the consent calendar was we took a lot of action at the last meeting, and there were some areas that I thought needed clarification, just so that if people were reading our minutes down the road, they'd understand what it was we voted on, because we had some motion in discussion, call to question. So if you'll go to your minutes of January 24th, under general business 4A, the second action item would be moved by Commissioner Greenlee, second by Commissioner Matsushima, the motion to approve let's go down one more, which is, that is correct. So the motion to approve scenario 4 to CED and City Council supporting staff recommendation, it failed 3-5-2. We want to add in commissioners so it can be identified, because if you remember, Commissioner Hendricks was on the phone, and we did waste votes on that. So if there's no objection, we want to add the names to that so that we know where the votes fell. And then under the next motion, because to call the question, we had no one voting against it, so there's no reason to put any names in there. But under the second motion, which was moved by Commissioner Greenlee, seconded by Commissioner Cruz, the motion to recommend scenario 10B, it would basically have the same type of wording as above, that would say the motion to recommend scenario 10B to the City Council and adopt the recommendation by the 4 commissioners. That would be added to that action item, and then we would put our names in there so we knew who was absent, and we did have an abstention on that vote, which was Commissioner Schmidt. Are there any objections to that change?
Question?
Yes.
So the thrust of the change you want to make is to list this individually as we voted?
No, as we got this and we read through it, it seemed confusing that we didn't clarify some things. For example, if you look at item 4A, the first action item, the way that it's printed says, upon motion by Commissioner Greenlee, second by Commissioner Cruz, to end the discussion. To end the discussion on what? So we're adding in there, on the motion to approve scenario number 4 to the first motion. All we're doing is clarifying that motion to end discussion, when the question was called, we need to refer it to what it's in reference to, which then brings it to the next motion that's down below. It might be easier if I show you.
I wasn't confused when I read it the first time. So.
Okay, so it was just the motion to end discussion. The motion to end discussion passed, but it didn't say up above here what we were discussing. So we're adding in on the motion to approve scenario 4. So we're ending discussion on, does that make sense?
Just clarifying.
We're just clarifying. Say that's happening on the second motion to end discussion as well.
I see that.
Does that make sense?
And then you want to list our names?
Well, so we have an abstention. Nobody knows who abstained. Nobody knows where anybody voted. And with council votes that are significant, people's names get listed.
I have no objection to having my vote recorded by name rather than by number, so I have no objection.
Well, Matthew, do you want to say how we do?
No, typically these are, the clerk's office states that we do action minutes. And so that's why they were performed in this way. If you guys wish to make this change, this is not a problem, we'll make the change.
Yeah.
So the idea was down the road, you know, we're not going to remember what was said, and the minutes are supposed to be there to reflect it. That's all we're asking, to clarify when we end discussion on something, what we're ending discussion on, moving to the next action item. So,
I'm okay.
does anyone have a question in reference to what we're talking about on that one? And that would end up, we would just add that additional language, you know, to say that the motion to end discussion is on scenario 4, the motion to end discussion on scenario 10B, and I believe we had one other one where we would just record, you know, the names of who voted with that.
On each of those.
On each of those.
Okay.
Would there be any objections? All right, I entertain a motion to approve item 3C with the changes that we've indicated. If there's a motion from the floor. Commissioner Cruz.
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Pyle. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to reports and information. So just chair's oral comments. We did, after the last meeting, have 5 commissioners. We had actually a very nice showing at the Community Economic Development Committee meeting that was held last Monday. There was Commissioner Matsushima, Commissioner Greenlee, Commissioner Pyle, Commissioner Hendricks, and myself that attended that meeting, all having comments in reference to whether it be for or against scenario 4 or scenario 10. And I just want to say that I appreciate that the members of the commission took the time to go to the CED meeting. I think it's important when we have important items on the agenda. We probably haven't dealt with a more important item in the last several years. And so I certainly appreciate everybody's time on this, and I think that the commission as a whole was well represented. So I don't want to take up any more time with additional comments, but I will take the opportunity and go around the room for commissioner comments. And Commissioner Blank, I'm going to start with you this time because I always seem to start to the left.
You're skipping over.
Yeah. Well, I was,
hang on.
E.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just noticed that we didn't have a spot on there for the other, unless, oh, I'm sorry.
E.
I wrote over it because, I'll hold on that because I wrote over it when we were making notes earlier, so I apologize for that. I'm going to hold off on that for now, but just be thinking about comments you'd like to make, because I do think it's important that all commissioners, be able to comment at our meetings. So going to the director's report, that would be our Assistant Director of Aviation, Judy Ross. Welcome.
Hi. I just wanted to mention a couple items. We'll go to the airport master plan. We do have the notice of prep that did close on January 31st. We received 13 comments. About half of them were like agency type comments, and the other part was a mixture of various comments that we received. So those have gone over to our consultant who's preparing the responses. We do anticipate to have a draft EIR issued for public for public review, the 45-day public review in June, July-ish of this year, so right around the summer. And then the hearing with ALUC will take place right around that time as well. So we are hoping to get the draft EIR to the commission in September, October, so you can take a look at it and add the comments. And then it goes to the planning commission, council by the end of the year. So we are progressing with the environmental, and the environmental had the list of projects that are before you. So we're progressing, and so far it appears that we will be staying on schedule. The second item.
Let me just ask you
Sure.
a quick question on that, just because I written an item on the agenda. Later on, under other reports, are you going to be discussing the EIR further, or
This is it. So if there's any questions, I'll be able to answer any
great.
questions.
Thank you. Then I'll take that one off my list. Thank you. Any questions on EIR? That's the environmental impact report, Commissioner Blake.
Well, the bullet points there didn't show what's going to happen to the fire station.
The fire station had its own environmental. The environmental was completed before we issued as we went out to do the RFP for the ARC station. So that's why it's not on this list, because it had its own environmental action.
It will be relocated to the same area as the police and the
Facilities,
facilities.
right? The former San Diego State, sorry, San Jose State. We were talking about internships this morning. San Jose State site. So it would be, the order would be the San Jose Police Department, the ARP station, and then the facilities division. Facilities.
Other questions on the EIR? Just since you brought up fire, what kind of time frame are we looking at to see a build out over there?
Okay, so the fire station, or what we call the ARF station, Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting, was submitted for a supplemental grant with the FAA. That was the additional money they had in the airport improvement program to be distributed across the nation. And so they received $11 billion worth of projects for about $800 million worth of work. So it's taking a while to sort through that. However, we've had follow-up conversations with the airport district office up at San Francisco, and they've been asking a lot of questions. That leads me to believe that if we don't get it in the supplemental, we'll probably get it in the fall cycle. So I'm hopeful that if we don't get it supplemental, we'll get it sometime in August under the regular AFP program.
So at the point in time that you get those funds, is there groundbreaking that takes place after that, or how does that work?
Okay, it was a design build selection, because we had to have the design build and the price proposal to submit the application with supplemental. So if we're able to get the grant, we'll go to council and get a contract awarded. That usually takes a month to 2 months, depending when it actually hits and what. July is if there's any council meetings in July, so it just depends on when the grant comes and the cycle of the council meetings, and then we'll be into design for a few months. Overall, it's probably about 18 month to 2-year project.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner Pilot?
Yeah, I guess this is probably as much a comment as a question, and I submitted a lengthy submission with Commissioners Hendricks and Connolly and Greenlee, and it may not really, in one sense, have to do with the airport, but it does. But in the sense that what we saw was a plan that was really kind of a specific kind of, this is what we're going to do, but it wasn't really a strategic vision, and a strategic vision that goes beyond the airport and how everything ties together. How it ties to downtown, how it ties to North San Jose, to St. Clair train station part, and part of a comprehensive plan that kind of puts people first, whether the people are the passengers or people are the citizens of San Jose and greater Silicon Valley. So that's kind of, and maybe that goes to council to kind of be leading that vision, but it seems like there's several things going on here. And we've got the OEI study, which could impact what we look like as an airport, that could impact our types of passengers we have or how many we have, and I didn't see that accounted for. Lots of new technologies. When I was at CES last month, this air taxi thing that people are talking about and real excited about, maybe it won't be like a George Jetson things, but maybe it'll be Back to the Future, where remember we used to have those helicopters that went from SFO to San Jose, right? It seems very viable, and you might have those sorts of things from here to Merced or here to Los Banos, and so it could change the dynamics of our landside operations and our operations inside, just like autonomous vehicles will. The parking we need may not, be the same. We've been lucky the revenue's been going up, but how long will that last? Didn't see that really factored in. And then things just, our housing issues. We have fallow land around here. I was looking at the Finland airport in Vatna, and they actually have integrated, it's called the Aviopolis, and it's way out there thinking, but they've integrated people living near the airport. And so those are the kinds of things that I would like to see, kind of how does all that vision come into being, because that may impact some of the specifics, especially as you go out 20, 30 years, right? So that was, and it's in the comments, so you can read them there.
Yeah.
You see the video.
Yeah, point well taken. We did get those comments. The EAR is a very procedural-driven process. Right. And with our FAA rules, we still have to follow the rules of the FAA, but there's a broader sense that you're interested in. Some of it's been working on a city-wide basis when you talk about the trains and stuff. It's being handled by DOT of the city, but we're all integrated together, and we bring in the stakeholders. So, but that process is being led by DOT. So it's a lot of the items that you brought up are a larger process than just the airport.
Yeah, it just seems like there's this interactivity, where you're starting here, it may change a little bit in 6 months, 9 months, or whatever. So it seems like there's need to be able to adjust if you need to. So, thanks.
And we adjust every day because it changes every day here.
Any other questions regarding the EAR? Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, and just an update on the interim facility. You guys have probably driven by it periodically. Every day it looks different. The gate areas are dried in, meaning so the weather doesn't come inside. The corridor is almost dried in, so we're progressing very well. The floor is poured. They're starting to hang the utilities now. We do anticipate that the building will be able to be commissioned and start activation on May 1st. And so it's about a 4 to 6 week process because you have to bring in all the employees and of all the airlines that are going to be in there and train them on each jet bridge and the activation of all the technology systems. So we fully intend that our building will be functional and ready for operations on June 15th. So as we get closer to that date, we'll probably have some tours in May-ish when we feel it's safe for non-construction people to be in that building. But right now we're still full protection gear in there, but we're progressing really well. Fully expect to be in operations in that building by June 15th. So, some questions?
Anything else you'd like to report?
No, that's it.
Thank you so very much. Moving on to our council liaison who's joined us, Councilmember Raul Perales.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for missing in November the regular meeting before the end of the year there. My son was born in mid-October, and so the scheduling was a little bit tough as we went through the first couple months, and I tried to spend as much time as possible at home.
Congratulations.
So thank you very much. And then, as you know, the special meetings end up being a little bit hard as well to schedule. Mindy was able to make one of them from my team. Because my calendar's kind of already all booked out, so as special meetings come about, they make it a little bit tougher. But nonetheless, certainly I think the biggest issue, right, that we have coming up is OEI, which comes to council at the end of this month here. And there was a good discussion at the CED meeting there, and I appreciate the commission's. I know a number of commissioners went in on putting together a very extensive report. Which I had an opportunity to read over and could certainly tell the amount of time that you put into that. So I appreciate that. And I think this commission, as it should, has a sole focus on looking at the needs of the airport and not necessarily a holistic need of everything and looking from that standpoint. And I think that's exactly what the commission tried to do. Granted, there wasn't a unanimous vote from the commission, so I understand that, and I don't agree with the position that the commission, the majority of the commission, ended up supporting. And we will have an opportunity, though, to be able to discuss that, and then council will ultimately make a vote on that at the end of this month. And so I know for the commissioners that were able to attend the committee meeting, you're probably aware, but for those that aren't, it'll be on the 26th of this month, so a Tuesday afternoon. Unfortunately, probably sometime during the day. We can never pinpoint the exact hour. We start the council meetings at 1:30. The likelihood is, it's going to happen a couple hours or so after that, but it could be 6 hours after that. So it's really hard to kind of pinpoint the exact time that it may happen. You had a question?
Yeah, why are you against it?
So I can get into kind of a little bit of I don't know if it allots for time, but I don't mind at all.
I think it's a legitimate question. I think that we are. Obviously, we have some differing opinions on it, and I think it's good to share it, so please.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. So, and mind you, right, it's just my opinion, so I'm not speaking for the full council, right? The full council will make its vote on the 26th. I don't even speak for the committee, because the committee really just makes a recommendation to move it to council. So the committee didn't necessarily say, yes, we 100% agree with this. What we said is we agree with the staff report, sort of. We want to hear a couple other things before it comes to council, and then the full council will ultimately make the decision. So for me, looking at really what the opportunities are for growth of our downtown, more importantly west, kind of this now western part of downtown that we want to grow all around Diridon Station. Right now, we, as you guys are aware, we are capped, right at a significantly lower height than the downtown core. And we wanted to, that's where we sought out with this OEI for the second time now, right, in a decade, right, to look at how we can actually get some expansion within that area before we begin to actually approve projects and build out. Because that's, right, we now know that with Google moving forward, that's inevitable. We're going to start to see the build out finally around Diridon Station. And as I was talking to Dan earlier, we get really one opportunity to do this. As you approve a development, it's probably going to stand there for minimum 50, but more likely 100 years, right? You're going to get a whatever it is, a 10-story, 16-story, or 20-something story building. It's not going to be something where you approve it, you build it, and then you go, hey, 15 years from now, we think we want to go a little bit higher, so let's mow down the buildings that are there. So you get one really opportunity as you begin to plan this area and approve projects, and we know that we're bumping up against that timeline right now as we're going to begin to approve projects not only with Google's development, but anything else that gets built out around Diridon.
Yeah,
which is why we were right, wanted to have this conversation now, because we said, well, let's address that today so that we can do this right and not have to come back and realize that we undercut ourselves with where we can actually build out downtown. At the same time, recognizing certainly there's a trade-off, right? As the higher you go in the downtown, the more and to what we have staff's work and what the committee put forward as a package or a recommendation, which was just to remove OEI altogether. Knowing that there are trade-offs, whether it was that or whether it was the recommendation that the commission made, which was 10B, to say, right, we don't necessarily think we want to remove OEI, but we are okay with some sort of growth. Either way, what we understood was that there's going to be a trade-off, right? As you try to go higher in the Diridon area or downtown, that's going to affect what happens at the airport. It's going to affect some of the flights. It's going to affect some of the current operations potentially, and some of the potential growth in the future. And so that's what we were hoping that this committee was able to filter through. And as you know, one of your commissioners was able to sit on that through that kind of extensive discussion. I monitored from afar. I wasn't always part of that conversation. I had a staff member of mine that was there at each of those meetings to kind of follow what was going on, and I presented myself a few times to be part of the dialogue. And did not have an opinion right out the gate. I think that's what we wanted to do, was to see what was the best opportunity moving forward, what were the trade-offs. And so my understanding and what I had asked staff to maybe do a little bit better job on presenting when they come to the council was really what is the potential significant loss that we will have today. And I do understand the commission's coming from, or the majority of the commission's coming from a point of
safety,
potential loss in the future. I wouldn't actually say safety, and I think, Tom, I did mention this too, because I know, Catherine, you mentioned it at the committee meeting. I think it's the words I used at the committee meeting were a red herring. I think it's completely wrong to state that we are jeopardizing safety, because we legally could not do that. We could not make a decision that would say we're going to make it less safe for the airlines that are coming through or the airplanes that are going to be flying over the downtown core. There is a threshold that we have to adhere to. And what we will do, and what the trade-off, this is the trade-off, is if there is a plane that is not going to be able to meet that threshold, that's where we get into the issue of, well, now we're going to have to actually potentially unload some cargo or unload a couple passengers, right? And granted, that's not something that I want to do either, but we would never say, okay, go out with the extra passengers and now actually jeopardize safety. So yes, it could be a potential that it is a hit to an airline or even us as an airport where we're losing cargo or we're losing passengers. I'm not denying that. But we are, and by no means, going to jeopardize somebody's safety to say, well, let's just go to where we know we're now going to not be above that threshold that we need to be, that the FAA requires us to adhere to. So I think that's where I think it's unfortunate, because I know that was the sentiment in the report that I read that you guys had put together. And I don't know if staff just didn't do a decent enough job at explaining why we were not going to jeopardize the safety of our passengers and why legally we could not go beyond the threshold of the FAA. And so I don't know if that helps clear it, right? But I mean, that's just, right? That's my understanding of it. And as well, it's our professional staffs at the airport in regards to what our threshold actually has to be to have as a minimum. So, and this is where I don't mind, like I said, sharing it. I don't want to take up the entire commission meeting, kind of going back and forth. Commissioner Hendricks and I are going to have an ability next Thursday, and everybody's kind of invited to debate this down at Cafe Stritch downtown. And then we'll have an ability to debate it on the council. And so I don't mind chatting about it. I would hate to kind of get into the discussion of the debate here, and I'll leave it to you, Chair. I'm here for the next couple hours, so I don't mind, right, personally.
Can I just respond to one point?
Please, yeah.
The bird strike on takeoff.
Aviation is built on layers of safety. Now, the safest thing for an airplane is to never leave the ground. But that, of course, kind of negates the whole idea of air travel, right?
Yes.
But that is the safest place. We don't start the engines, we just sit there. We're probably pretty safe.
Agreed.
So the FAA minimum on OEI is just that. That is the minimum standard. And if we look at a typical day on South Flow operations at San Jose, probably no airplanes are actually at the minimum capability. They're all somewhere above that. And that is all additional layers of safety. As the temperatures get warmer, we build taller structures. Now we start talking about those weight penalties. So what's going to happen is, whereas today we may only have 1% of the airlines operating at the very minimum safe level, 10 years from now, maybe that's 5%, 10%, 15%. What we've done is decrease the level of safety for more flights. The 737 going to LA, he's always going to be way up above that minimum. It's never going to come into account for him. But what happens is you reduce those layers of safety, mistakes get magnified. So as somebody who gives check rides to commercial airline pilots on a monthly basis, I've never seen a perfect check ride. I've never seen one in a simulator. Human beings make mistakes. The object as pilots is to trap those mistakes and then mitigate the damage done by the mistake. And most of the times it ends up in a very good conclusion. We have the best safety record in the world in the United States. And it's because we've built on this layer of safety. So there's two falsehoods to your argument. First is we are removing current OEI protection, but we can never remove OEI protection. There has to be OEI protection for every airline that operates here. They will have to come up with a plan, and like you said, probably taking off fuel, passengers, cargo. But saying we're removing OEI, we are not. We're removing current OEI protection, but we will always have OEI protection off the departure end of the runway. The second thing is we're decreasing the safety level. We're not going below the minimum, because if it was below the minimum, we just wouldn't take off. But we have decreased the level of safety. Now again, if council decides that that decrease in safety and the hit to the airport in the future that's council's decision. But I just want to make sure that when we make statements that we're being factually correct. We are not removing OEI, and we are reducing the level of safety.
Yeah, and in fact, I think because I'm hearing, maybe I'm just not saying it right. Maybe you didn't hear what the committee said, but I agree with you 100%. Right. So I don't. And when I'm speaking here in sort of short tongue, it's not the full statement that should be said. I agree with you. Right. We're not just eliminating OEI. OEI is still going to exist because you're going to have to account for what happens when one engine does go out. Right. Agreed. We're eliminating OEI as it exists today with that protections. And I actually don't disagree with you either. We are absolutely lowering that threshold, that extra buffer of safety that we had. I'm not disagreeing with that either. So I think where the sentiments got crossed was that what I saw in the report and what Commissioner Hendricks came up and said made it sound as though we were actually going to threaten the safety of our passengers, and that there's a bare minimum threshold that we have to meet. But I would agree with you. We are absolutely currently what we have today, right? There is an extra buffer of safety in there. So I don't disagree with you on that either. So I think in that sense, right, that we are speaking about the same thing. And I don't think I don't think the committee misunderstood that. I think they understood that, hey, we have this buffer of OEI. If we do eliminate that,
the comment that safety was a red herring, because it really isn't. I guess the technical response would be the level of safety.
Yes.
So again, we're not going to do anything unsafe. As a commercial pilot, I'm not going to take off. Forget about you sitting in the back of my airplane. I want to live. So, I'm not going to do it. And you just benefit because you're sitting 100 feet behind me. But the level of safety is definitely reduced because we've taken away that buffer, and now we will have more airplanes operating at the minimum. And that's where a mistake by a pilot, a mistake by an air traffic controller, now we may not recover from those kinds of mistakes on a far greater number of flights than what we currently have today.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I think there's potentially mixing of kind of words to be exact on, but I think that is, at least that's my clear understanding of it, and I think the committee understands as well that by removing the OEI, there is a buffer of, where right now we have an extra cushion for, I don't know whenever it's used, but
different from every airplane on every day.
Yeah, but we're definitely not going to go beyond that. It's sort of our minimum standard of safety that we have to.
Because the FAA won't allow the airlines to do it. So it's not.
And we wouldn't want to do it either. Yeah, we wouldn't want to do it either. So. Yeah.
And I appreciate the comments, both of you, because I believe it gives a good perspective. Commissioner Head, you did have your hand up. I wanted to recognize.
Yeah, I would like to just throw a voice in for the minority in the commission. And I, no problem being in the minority, but I think in casting my own vote, I never thought I was diminishing the level of safety. My perception of the current standards are that at the time it was adopted, for reasons that are in the report or whatever else went on, the decision was made to have that level of OEI as to what it is. Looking at air traffic operations, we have changed separation levels because there's been a technical ability to have airplanes fly safer or at closer altitudes. We have concentrated our air traffic historically and done it in a safe manner, primarily by increasing the technology. As a layperson voting in a recommendatory, or when I actually sat on council where I had a vote, I was always cognizant that the technical and responsibility is with the FAA and agencies like that, and with the airlines themselves as the responsible private party in the air traffic control system. That the vote I was doing would be reliant on their technical expertise, both the airlines and the FAA, but that where I would be making a judgment was in terms of the best of life for the citizens of San Jose, which is a balance of a whole series of things. And when I looked at the recommendation of the staff and voted in support of that, I felt we were maintaining all the safety that was responsible and reasonable and giving an opportunity for a concentration of economic strength for the airport and for the city of San Jose at large. So I appreciate we're in different places. What caused me to raise my hand is the description of facts, I don't think is a clear enough characterization. A fact for you is, and a fact for me is a little different, and that's where we have our disagreement. I think we're safe with the recommendation we made. You don't. And I think that's why we're, so it's I hope we think we're both coming from good motivations. I think that. But there's
Facts
some...
are facts.
No, I don't think. That's the disagreement we're having.
No, facts are facts. Again, I'm not saying we're not going to be safe. I'm saying we've lowered the level of safety. Council member agrees with me. I mean, that's just common sense. That's a pure
In that
fact.
sense, I'll disagree
Okay, Jim.
gently with both of them.
All right, Jim.
Well, and it is always
Maybe it's
difficult
fake
when there
news.
are some differing opinions, but I think the discussion is always good because I believe that through discussion, we may end up coming up with an even better plan. So I do appreciate the input here. Council, did you have a question for the council member?
Oh, go or Commissioner Schmidt had his arm first.
Just curious, and I'll throw it out there. Maybe Commissioner Greenlee might know best. Can you name some of the other airports around the country that we might be aware of where it's closer, to use your placeholder numbers, it's closer to 15% of flights being at the minimum altitude rather than the 1%? I mean, like Denver in the middle of nowhere, I assume, doesn't have a problem, right? But
Or so take Los Angeles, departing to the west, you go out over the water. There's
Right.
no OEI. Orange County, taking off to the east, huge OEI hit, which is
Okay.
why Orange County doesn't have very many long-distance flights, especially in the east operation. Fortunately for them, much like us, their east operation is the minimum. San Diego has a famous parking garage that got built illegally, and then they didn't tear it down. So it has really impacted the amount of usable runway for landings. And when they switch to an east operation, it pretty much eliminates anything past San Francisco as far as, what you can legally take off at. The good news for San Diego is, again, most of their operation is a westerly operation, so they're out over the water. Airports that have the most restrictive weight penalties, Washington Reagan is probably the biggest, but that's not due to structures, that's due to prohibited airspace over the capital. New York LaGuardia has very strict OEI because it's basically in downtown New York. So those cities are much higher percentages than what we are right now anyway, as far as the limitations on takeoffs due to OEI.
Are there, I just want to throw this out because I don't know the answer, and Judy, you may know the answer. Are there any airports operating strictly on TERPs with cities that have no OEI protected airspace in the country?
Well, they have OEI, it just depends where that OEI is.
Right, but I mean, the city has provided for that space like we were doing. I just don't know the answer to that question.
Each city is different, and each airport is different. If you go out to Dallas, Fort Worth, you go to Denver, they have 34,000 acres. Dallas has 43,000 acres. Of course, they own all the property on either side, so they're not so impacted, and they're both relatively, historically speaking, new airports, not necessarily downtown. We did do a case study on Miami, Reagan, and we tried to get Las Vegas, but Las Vegas was very hesitant on giving us any information, so they asked not to publish it. So Miami has an ordinance, and theirs is pretty much up to Part 77 and TERPs, and they have allowed a high-rise development in a certain area along the beach. But each airport is different. When I was in Phoenix, our OEI, we had set substantially because we had, I guess it's the Sun Stadium, which was the controlling obstruction. We set it on that controlling obstruction. The other end was in Tempe, and so there was no protection in the Tempe area. And that was just done working with developers and at least trying to get the aircraft down. It's a lake. I forgot what the river's called, but it was the lake. But it's working with the developers and trying to get good preservation of certain airspace depending upon a controlling obstruction. But every airport is different, and Orange County is really kind of different because they're really in a confined area, but they also have a significant noise ordinance that they're limited by the number of passengers that they can bring in. So new flights into Orange County is really a trade-off. If I bring in you, I gotta tell somebody they can't come in. So they have other issues set by a long-standing noise issue in Orange County. But it just depends on the case studies that we are formally writing up are the Miami and Reagan. And Reagan is because of the restricted airspace, like over the Capitol and the President's White House and things like that. So.
Great, thank you for answering that. And I believe, did I see one more hand?
Well, I have
Commissioner Pyle?
Yeah. I was just, I think, and I'll defer safety to Commissioner Greenlee because I know a little about that. I know a little about, not much, but reading through the documents and stuff at the CED meeting, I made it probably not a good analogy, but it was a good analogy in the sense that the documentation we've gotten has been kind of fragmented, and I saw the 37 documents, which provided a lot more background, but it was very painful to have to go through it. And I would have thought for as much money as we spent on the consulting report, we'd have a nice thing like this. But that's kind of a comment. But my real point being that my concern is that from an economic standpoint, and the way I'm reading this, it could be totally wrong, but it really hasn't been refuted yet, and that is, we're assuming that it's built up to the max. I have a nice diagram of this, but built up to the max. But the reality is we don't want that. We want variety. And so it seems that the first time that first obstruction comes up, we get the ultimate loss, regardless of how it gets built out. So that's how the economic model should be modeled, and I don't think it's like that. So that's my concern, is that we may not get the benefit we think we're getting. So that's a concern. And then who owns those air rights? If we have an OEI here today, and now we're saying, okay, you can go up now this much higher, does the public own those air rights? And so are we giving the developer air rights? Are we giving them a public asset for no charge? And so those questions haven't really been addressed yet. So that's my biggest concern, is there's still a lot of stuff we don't know.
Yeah, we don't own those air rights either.
Who does?
It's basically the FAA has
So the federal
responsibility
government?
of the airspace. We don't own those air rights unless we buy them.
But we're restricting a private developer today from having them. So
They're doing it, we're not restricting, we're working in cooperation with the development community.
well, they could build beyond OEI today.
They
Is what
could,
you're saying.
they submitted, and the FAA did. The city's guidelines is they have to submit to the FAA responds back to that submittal. And if that submittal, if their response back through the obstruction survey says you can penetrate this, but obstructed, or it's an obstruction, put a light on it and marking, or if they go up to the chirps and interfere with the chirps, they will send a letter saying you only can build to this height because of, and they'll state their reasons. And that letter goes to city planning, and city planning has been incorporated into their planning reviews that essentially gets in the whole development process that goes to the planning commission and the ultimate city council.
So now I'm really confused.
No, it's a
Is
very
anyone else
confusing
confused, or is it
process.
just
It's a
me?
very confusing process, but we don't own the air rights unless we buy them or we get a navigation easement
So
through a
you're saying the
development
developer
process.
still owns the air rights then?
But the FAA is responsible for all the airspace.
But if you can buy them, you're buying them from somebody, so somebody must own them. I think is the confusing part.
Yeah,
right?
who owns those air rights?
It would be the person who owns the property who wants to make that development.
So I'll answer it slightly differently. So if we were to allow the heights to be raised of the buildings within let's say there's a building that's already built right in downtown right now. Because this decision we make may allow a few extra feet, right, within some of the buildings downtown, maybe even 30 feet, right, in certain places. A building that is currently there wouldn't just be able to build another couple floors, which is highly unlikely. You guys are already built. But let's say they want to do some sort of neat articulation, like some light towers up on top. They wouldn't be able to do that without getting council approval, without getting approval of our planning department, right? Our planning director, potentially, if it didn't go to a full council, was at least go to a director's hearing to say, can you do this? Are you in accordance with this? And what the council is saying right now is that we actually would like to have a value capture of the feet that we are actually allowing to add now, because you're right.
So effectively, you're selling the rights.
Effectively, we would say, if you come in, we have just made a decision that you can go up another 30 to 150 feet. But there's a value to that. Obviously, right, there's a value to that company to be able to do that. So we want to attach a value to it as well, to say, what is going to be the community benefit for us to allow you, because we still have the permitting rights, right? We still have the ability to approve or deny an actual development coming in. So that's where we'll have an opportunity to do that. And that, I don't know if you recall, but
Jeffrey Buchanan.
Yeah, he came up and spoke about it, and then my colleague Maya Esparza sort of mentioned it and said as well. Said, well, that's sort of what. That's where that conversation is going, and absolutely, we want to be able to capture the value. We wouldn't have to, and I would say there's probably some people on my council that are going to say, just let them build it, right? Like once we raise the heights, just let somebody build up into their allowable heights without sort of any value capture on that increase. I'm not on that side. I'm on the side of, if we're going to allow them to increase the heights, then we should capture some value from it. I would agree with you as well. We're not going to get 100% of these buildings to go all to the height. We want some articulation, right? So I agree with you on that, and I think my comments that I made at the committee too were, my decision is not based off of the economic model that says we're going to achieve 100% of the potential, because we don't even want to, right? We want nice articulation.
But that's the way it's modeled in the report, right? That's my issue.
I think the report is looking at it as, here's the capacity, right? And so we're going to tell you, this is what it could go to, right? And here's what it currently. And it's going to go somewhere in that, in between that. For me, right, the decision is not, it's if we hit 100% of capacity, we get this much economic value out of it. I know that we're not going to do that, so I'm just not. I'm not basing my decision at least on that, and I would agree with you, right? Your analysis is right. That's where we're not going to hit 100%. So the potential,
But
the potential value is correct. The realistic value that we're going to capture is low.
Yeah, and that's my concern. Is if the economic loss to the airport is greater, or as much as we see, could we be in the negative territory?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you get one building built, but then not others.
No, yeah. Which I think that's not realistic either, right? I think the reality is already we know Google's going to want to, tap out with a couple of their buildings, right? And we're going to see. So I think the reality is we're going to see a nice mix. We're not going to see 100%. So by any means.
I want to move us along, but I did have Commissioner Blake on here, and so I want to finish up with you and anything else the council member may have before we move on to our agenda.
Okay. My concern is not so much for safety, because obviously the airlines are going to do whatever they have to modify their departures, but I think we're going to lose a huge number of international flights that we currently have, and we won't be getting any more. So this is certainly going to be a good opportunity for the airport to do away with building a new international terminal, because we're never going to need it. I think I certainly support the Airports Commission's position to try and protect the airport, because I think that's our main function, is to preserve this airport. And I think it's very unfortunate. This has not been brought to the AOUC. The next AOUC meeting is on the 27th, the day after the City Council will vote on this. So I guess they're going to come brief the AOUC on what it is they've decided. So, and this certainly is not consistent with the existing comprehensive land use plan for the land around this airport.
Would you define the acronym you use so that the members of the audience understand what that is, the ALUC?
Well, that's the Airport Land Use Commission, that is a state-mandated commission that is responsible for preserving the safety and noise limits in lands surrounding airports. So we do have some height restrictions, over the years, many of the buildings that have already been built downtown, we found inconsistent with the land use plan, but were overridden by a supermajority vote at the city council, and they go ahead and build the buildings, and now we have this problem where the last area we have, it's an out for the airlines if an engine fails. Now we want to build tall buildings there. And this is just, it's nuts. The FAA basically does not care about the airspace around the airport. If you want to put a tower off the end of the airport, you can build it. They will just change their procedures to say, well, you can't do this arrival anymore, you can't do this approach anymore. It's a local land use decision, and the FAA sort of, well, whatever you want to do. If you want to kill your airport, go ahead and do it.
Thank you for those comments. I want to give the last comments to you, council member, and I want to thank those in the audience that got to hear this. There was an important discussion at our last meeting. We didn't have many members of the public actually here, but I think this is healthy for the commission because we're not 100% on one side or the other of the issue, and we all respect each other. We all actually get along really well together, and I think it's healthy to have the discussion. That's why I've allowed it to go like I have. Council member, the last word.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just to clear up one thing to what Commissioner Blake was saying, we're actually not making a land use decision. So we're actually, with this decision, we wouldn't be, it wouldn't automatically approve any development to go to that height level. So we would still need to make land use decisions around the potential growth in these areas. So this would be a specific decision around OEI. It actually would not yet change any of the land use. So what you see in the report makes it appear, I think, that when the council makes the decision, let's say if we agree with staff's report and we say, yeah, we want to eliminate OEI as it stands today, that doesn't then automatically trigger all the heights to increase in the Deer Dawn area. So that still has to happen. The council still has to make a land use decision, which at that point would actually trigger making sure that we go to the Airport Land Use Commission. And so that's I think it's a bit of a nuance as well, is that this doesn't automatically entail the next. Now, granted, that's where we're going, right? So it's not that wouldn't be the next step, but that's why we're not necessarily having to go to the Land Use Commission or the Airport Land Use Commission prior to this vote.
Great.
So, and then anyways, thank you as well for I think Chair, your ability to kind of lead through this issue is what's helped the dialogue along, and I appreciate that. And so I think you get a lot of credit for being able to help that along, because this is as the Commission pointed out, right? This is one of the more tense, sort of issues that this Commission has taken part in a number of years. So appreciate that.
Thank you. And I've been advised that Mr. Beekman would like to speak on this issue, and so if you would join us, please.